My name is Miles Carter, and 9 years ago I was the punchline at my own wedding. I remember the heat of the afternoon sun beating down on the courthouse steps as I stood there in a borrowed suit that smelled faintly of mothballs, the bride beside me radiant in white chiffon. Behind us, Ivy's family, the Stantons, watched with contempt hidden in painted smiles. Surgeons in tailored jackets, researchers with polished cufflinks, and professors with crisp name tags lined the benches, murmuring among themselves. I felt their eyes pin me to the spot like I was an exhibit in some twisted academic menagerie. The ugly high school grad, they called me. Unworthy of Ivy Stanton, irrelevant to their legacy, a mechanic with grease-stained hands where pedigree should have been. Their verdict was swift and unanimous. I did not belong. Ivy squeezed my hand as the judge asked if we took one another. Her eyes found mine, steady and warm, and I said, I do, with more conviction than I'd ever felt before. But when our lips brushed for that first married kiss, I tasted something bitter underneath her sweetness, regret, perhaps, or fear of what had already been lost. The family didn't applaud. They didn't smile. They simply turned away. My father-in-law, Dr. Julian Stanton, leaned forward and muttered to my father-in-law, "She'll see the truth soon enough." And just like that, the next decade of my life was defined by proving him wrong. Now, after years of rebuilding a life, I refinished engines instead of gold watches, rewrote code instead of academic papers. I found myself standing in the marble foyer of the Roseview Hotel. The chandelier's crystals winked overhead, scattering light like fractured diamonds. The scent of orchids and champagne was sweet enough to make a man dizzy. I knew every inch of this place would have been meticulously planned by Ivy's younger sister, Fiona, because everything the Stantons touched was curated with the precision of a surgeon's hand. I'd never been invited here, but I didn't need one. I had something far more powerful than a dusty invitation. I had success. My hair was neat, styled by a barber who charged as much as I used to make in a week. My suit was custom, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored at the shoulders and waist, trousers falling in a clean line to polished Oxfords. The mirror in the powder room reflected a man I barely recognized, broad-shouldered, confident, with eyes that held stories of late nights and early triumphs. The man who had once been sidelined by academic royalty had become the very architect of their new medical technologies. Yet I felt a flicker of that old nervousness as I stepped back into the reception hall, weaving between tables dressed in ivory linen and crystal glassware. I paused at the edge of the dance floor. The guests were a sea of crisp white coats and sequined gowns, laughing in clusters and toasting with flutes of golden bubbles. Their eyes flicked over me as I approached, curiosity rippling through the room like a physical force. Then I saw them. Dr. Margaret Stanton, resplendent in emerald silk, her lips pursed in distaste. Fiona, draped in lavender chiffon, her mouth twisting into a scornful sneer. Their gazes bored into me as though I were a fly buzzing against the stained glass window of their perfect world. Why is this defect here? Margaret spat the words so sharply they cracked the air. Her voice echoed through the hall, and several heads turned. My chest tightened. I braced as Fiona rose from her seat, porcelain face stormy. "You're not invited," she hissed, venom dripping from each syllable. A hush spread among the guests, the sacred vow of celebration fractured by their disdain. I lifted my chin and allowed myself a slow smile. My heart pounded, but my voice was calm when I spoke. "You have no idea, do you?" The words hung in the air, surprising even me with their quiet authority. Fiona's new husband, Dr. Malcolm Hale, innovation lead at Glenbridge Hospital, stood up so quickly his chair scraped across the marble floor. His cheeks flushed red. "How dare you?" he thundered. "This man is," he faltered when I didn't shrink away, when I met his glare head-on. I turned slightly, letting my gaze sweep over the crowd before settling back on Margaret. "I'm not here to crash your party," I said, voice measured. "I'm here because tonight you're celebrating innovation built on the very platform I created." I spread my hands, palms open, as if offering the truth on a silver platter. "You see me as a defect. You called me names. You mocked my education, my background, my worth. But that man you erased is the man whose work runs through every system in your hospital." A murmuring rose among the guests. Whispers fluttered like restless birds. Margaret's face paled, mascara streaking her cheeks. Fiona's husband glared at me, his mouth opening and closing as though he were searching for words that didn't exist. Someone tapped on a phone, and the screens lit up with articles. Forbes Autotech cover, Wired business feature, headlines proclaiming RevCore Systems as the cutting edge of medical diagnostics. The same system that now monitored patient equipment at the very hospital Dr. Hale represented. I let the moment stretch, enjoying the slow bloom of recognition on their faces. Their world had been built on pedigree and prestige, but the future belonged to execution and ingenuity. I spoke again, softer but no less firm. I didn't come here looking for apologies. I didn't come for validation. I came to remind myself that your rejection was never the end of my story. It was the spark that lit everything else. Dr. Hale mulled over my words. Then he nodded once, sharply, as if settling a heated debate within himself. He stepped forward, placing a hand on Fiona's arm. Miles Carter, he announced, voice carrying across the hall, is the founder of RevCore Systems. The same RevCore that replaced 3/4 of our outdated diagnostics platform last quarter. Recognition dawned in the guests' expressions, astonishment, confusion, grudging admiration. The hall buzzed as conversations reignited, now laced with astonishment at the man they'd once dismissed. I inclined my head in a brief, polite bow and then turned on my heel, making my way toward the exit. Ivy's face came into view for an instant, pale, conflicted, eyes full of questions. I didn't look back. Each step felt lighter than the last, as if I were shedding the weight of 9 years of derision. Outside, Elijah and my team waited in the car, engines idling. They cheered as I emerged, clapping me on the back. I climbed in, the door closing with a soft click. The hum of the engine sounded like possibility. I leaned back in the leather seat, heart racing with exhilaration rather than anger. The wedding would be remembered, not for its orchids or speeches, but for the ghost who returned triumphant, smiling, untouchable. And somewhere in the silence between us, I felt the truth settle. I was never the defect. I was the design they would never understand. Back then, I wasn't what they expected. I had no degree, no pedigree, just calloused hands and a stubborn grin. I was a mechanic who loved their daughter, Ivy Stanton, fiercely and honestly, and for that I was branded a failure. The reception hall where I'd first met her family looked more like a lecture theater than a place of celebration. Rows of mahogany chairs, draped with white satin bows, and tables arranged like lab stations, each with a printed program that read like a syllabus. Dr. Margaret Stanton, Ivy's mother, presided over it all with the clinical precision of a chief surgeon. Every salt shaker, every linen crease, every candle wick placed with unsettling exactness. When Fiona pointed me out to her friends as the family eyesore, laughter ricocheted off the vaulted ceiling. They treated me like a lab rat that had strayed into a university symposium, entertaining, risible, but too lowly to ever belong. Ivy tried to keep the peace. She smiled politely when her mother reviewed my threadbare resume, her father quizzed me on differential diagnoses, and her sister corrected my pronunciation of Stanton as though it were a medical term. "You know how we are," Ivy whispered when we rode home that night in my beat-up pickup. She reached for my hand in the dark, hands trembling. "They mean well. But peace with wolves means being devoured slowly," and I felt my confidence shrink each time Margaret's eyes flicked over me from beneath arched brows. Insults disguised as jokes piled up like unread directives. Cold dinners where I ate turkey carved into miniature rectangles, prednisone jokes tossed at me like confetti, murmurs of inevitable failure, sotto voce from men who wore white coats with embroidered initials. I believed that love could bridge every divide, but affection alone can't fill the chasm between privilege and purpose. During our first holiday at the Stanton estate, I watched Ivy ease into family rituals, handwritten toasts at sunset, opera recitals by staff pianists, scientific debates at dinner, all under the watchful gaze of her parents, who exchanged proud glances whenever Ivy parroted their jargon correctly. I sat silent, feeling like a caricature of the man she married. Each question about my mechanical shops, profit margins, and market viability reminded me that in their world, he who didn't publish papers or captivate grant committees didn't deserve his place at the table. I didn't argue. I tried to learn their language, borrowing books on biomedical ethics and machine learning diagnostics, even taking evening classes in computer science. I wanted to prove I could adapt, but each new skill I mastered only highlighted how far I'd come from where they began. When I presented them with a plan to modernize the hospital's aging maintenance fleet, complete with cost projections and workflow diagrams, their applause felt perfunctory. Dr. Julian Stanton nodded thoughtfully, then mentioned his son-in-law's lack of medical credentials with the same breath. "Ivy, darling, Miles's ideas are charming," he said, "but your mother and I prefer to rely on experts." Their rejection wasn't passive, it was strategic. They tightened the noose of exclusion so subtly I almost didn't notice until Ivy's own voice wavered. The silent treatment at family gatherings, invitations that arrived with names crossed out in crimson ink, and whispered warnings from Ivy's friends. He's too brash. He doesn't fit our profile. All choreographed to estrange me until I faded into the woodwork. In board meetings for her medical outreach foundation, I sat in a corner, unacknowledged and unvalued, as they debated grants I could have secured or technologies I could have streamlined. My dreams were dismissed like irrelevant footnotes in their volumes of self-importance. One evening, after a particularly brutal dinner where Margaret corrected my posture and Fiona critiqued my tie knot, Ivy invited me to walk the grounds with her. The moon was a sliver overhead, and the scent of magnolias drifted through the air. I tore into her gently, asking why she allowed her family to treat me so. Is this how you imagine our life? She hugged me tight, voice trembling. They love you in their way, she said. I wish they just saw you the way I do. But the dawn that followed brought fresh evidence of her acquiescence. An elegantly pinned apology note from her sister, followed by a text from her father excusing me from the next board meeting for my own comfort. There was no victory in pleading for acceptance. The breaking point came at my own wedding reception, 9 years ago today. Ivy and I stood beneath an arch of white roses, guests swaying to a string quartet, and I scanned the crowd for any sign of genuine warmth. Instead, I found Fiona raising her glass in a mocking salute, her lips curled in a disdainful smile. Margaret sat beside her husband's colleague, their heads bent together, as though sharing private observations about my lack of refinement. They watched as I danced with Ivy, her laughter bright and radiant, and still they remained apart, a united front of disapproval. That night, I realized that love alone couldn't outweigh the weight of their expectations. When Ivy tried to console me afterward, saying her family would come around, that I only had to prove myself more. The words felt hollow. I looked at my suit, still damp from the condensation of champagne flutes, and understood that no amount of charm or competence could bridge the gulf between our worlds. I spent the drive home replaying every harsh glance, every barbed comment. By the time we reached our apartment, dawn had crept across the sky, and the blush of first light made everything look new again. I wanted our marriage to defy those who opposed us, but sometimes defiance demands more than a beating heart. It demands sacrifice. I kept fighting, day after day, fixing transmissions at dawn, debugging code at dusk, pitching to investors late into the night. Whenever the strain of Ivy's family's condescension threatened to crush me, I reminded myself of my promise. I loved Ivy more than their approval. But love without respect is a fragile bond, and respect without love is empty prestige. I needed both to survive, and my world offered neither. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was building a future where cars and machines would learn, predict, and heal, all while human beings refused to learn, predict, or heal the wounds they inflicted. Still, I held on to hope. I pictured the day they would come to see me not as a mechanic or an outcast, but as an innovator who earned his place. I imagined Margaret admitting she was wrong to dismiss my talents, Fiona swallowing her pride, Julian acknowledging that passion and intellect could flourish outside academic pedigree. I imagined Ivy standing beside me without a single shadow of regret. But hope, like heartache, can linger indefinitely without fulfillment. As I stepped out of that reception hall tonight, memories of those early days flickered behind my eyelids, the brash confidence of a man in love, the raw vulnerability of someone striving to belong, and the stubborn determination that refused to yield. I had learned more about myself in those years of rejection than I ever could have in comfort. Ivy's family had tried to shape me into their mold, but in their arrogance, they only taught me the value of my own form. Chapter by chapter, I had rewritten my story, far from their world, but closer to the man I wanted to be. And tonight, I realized that the final draft would have to be written without them. It ended quietly. The evening air was thick with spring's haze, and the soft glow of streetlights guided me up the walk to our condo as I replayed Ivy's last words. They were right. You're holding me back. I hadn't believed her at first, had dismissed her tone as fatigue from another grueling residency shift. But the weight behind those words settled into my chest like a stone, and when I pushed open the front door, I found her standing in the kitchen, face pale under the harsh fluorescent bulbs. The wedding china spots, the faded wedding photo on the counter. All the tangible reminders of what we once vowed to protect. She looked at me, unshuttered by doubt, and held out her hand. In it lay the ring that had once symbolized our shared promise. I took a step forward, then realized I had only one recourse. I asked her to come back to the living room, but she shook her head and stayed rooted. The air smelled of leftover coffee and the faint trace of her perfume, one last fragrance serving as prelude to departure. She placed the ring gently on the cherrywood countertop, its gold band glowing faintly against the grain, and whispered, "It's not that I stopped loving you. It's just that I can't keep pretending they were wrong about you." Her voice quivered on the word, "you," as though it were a blade cutting through something essential inside me. I closed my eyes, tasting the metal on her fingertip, and felt every insult from the past 9 years thrum through my veins. Margaret's condescension, Fiona's laughter, Julian's biting advice to leave her before she realized her mistake. I thought of all the evenings I sat alone, coding until dawn to build RevCore's prototype, wondering if Ivy would ever acknowledge the life I was carving out. She'd been my anchor through every setback, every bailout pitch that failed, every investor who laughed at the mechanic who codes. But tonight, that anchor broke free and drifted away. She swallowed, eyes glistening. "I'm sorry, Miles. I thought I could bridge both worlds, but I can't. They convinced me that staying with you meant abandoning my family and my future." She picked up the ring and slipped it onto her finger, the gesture so natural it might have been rehearsed. I had no words to counter. The stories I'd chased about self-worth and potential felt hollow in the face of her surrender. When I finally spoke, my voice was low, as though I were afraid to shatter the moment further. "You remember the night we met?" I asked, stepping closer. We locked eyes across a greasy engine bay and laughed, because the carburetor we were fixing exploded in our faces. She managed a faint smile at the memory. I thought then that anything we faced would be ours to conquer. She nodded, but it wasn't enough. I glanced at our framed wedding invitation, yellowed at the edges now, and realized the simplest truth. Love without mutual conviction is merely an echo. I held out my hand and asked her if she'd like to stay for coffee. She shook her head again, tears brimming. "No," she said softly. "I need to go." Before I could find another plea, she turned away, her silhouette outlined by the foyer's dim light. I watched her retreat down the hallway, suitcase in hand, the sound of fabric brushing against floorboards echoing like a punctuation mark. Then the silence descended, absolute and unyielding. The ticking clock on the wall sounded far too loud, marking each heartbeat with an unrelenting punctuality. I sank into the leather armchair we'd chosen together, its cushions warm from her body. I closed my eyes and let the stillness wash over me, my breath the only movement in the room. In that hush, I felt the weight of 9 years of compromise. Every correctional glance from her family that I endured, every insult I swallowed for love, every night I stayed when perhaps I should have gone. All the sacrifices I made to earn a place beside her melted away in one moment of finality. At some point, exhaustion claimed me. My head lolled against the chair's arm, and I slipped into a restless sleep, haunted by fragments of our life together. My hands greasy with engine oil, her hands slipping into mine, my excitement at our first startup pitch, her pride despite her parents' skepticism. The night we danced alone in the living room, spinning to our favorite song by the window. In my dreams, she stood at the edge of a cliff, beckoning me to join her, and then stepping back out of reach. I woke with my heart pounding, throat dry, sunlight bleeding in through the curtains like judgment. When I rose, the condo was empty. Not a trace of Ivy remained, no coffee mug, no stray hairpin, no lingering perfume. Only the wedding ring, placed on the kitchen counter, waited for me. I picked it up and turned it in my fingers, its smooth band reflecting the morning light. It felt heavier than any engine component, heavier than the burdens I carried as I built RevCore. And then I did something I hadn't anticipated. I smiled. Not because I was happy she left, but because I realized I had nothing left to lose. The divorce papers arrived days later, couriered with the same clinical detachment as every confrontation I'd endured. I signed without argument, the ink gliding across the page like a silent vow to myself. No lawyers called, no last-minute pleas arrived. Ivy's absence resonated more profoundly than any fight could have. It marked the end of a chapter where I'd been judged by pedigree, education, and last names. Now I stood unbound, free to pursue the vision that had flickered inside me since that first sloppy explosion of an engine. In the weeks that followed, grief settled into a steady rhythm. I went to the garage each morning, wiped my hands on a rag, and lost myself in the mechanical symphony of pistons and pistons bearings. At night, I returned to my laptop, fingers dancing across the keyboard as lines of code assembled into something new and powerful. RevCore's user base was growing. Dealerships across the country clamored for demos. The platform learned from every diagnostic session, refining itself like a living organism. And with each breakthrough, I felt the void left by Ivy's departure fill not with sorrow, but with determination. My friends noticed the change first. Liam Burke sent a congratulatory text after RevCore inked its third international contract. Elijah, my lead developer, invited me to a celebratory dinner and raised a glass to Miles Carter, man of the hour. I accepted their praise with a quiet nod and gave thanks for people who saw my worth without question. The nights I spent alone were no longer haunted by rejection but energized by purpose. I wrote mission statements on whiteboards, sketched roadmaps on napkins, and pitched to investors with a fervor born of resilience. Each milestone I reached felt like a declaration. I was more than the sum of my past. One afternoon, I found myself staring at the divorce decree pinned above my desk. The bold letters, Final Judgment, glared from the page. I tore it down and crumpled it into a ball, tossing it into the recycling bin with a sense of finality. That document had been the culmination of doubt and despair, but now it represented possibility. I'd walked away from a life that demanded conformity and embraced one that celebrated innovation. The final blow had come in silence, but from that silence rose the loudest affirmation of all. I belonged to myself. And so I carried on, forging a path defined not by pedigree or approval, but by passion and perseverance. The ring remained on my dresser for weeks, until one morning I realized I no longer needed the reminder. I dropped it into the bin beside the recycling and watched it disappear beneath a pile of printed code snippets. No regrets. No lingering sorrow. Just the hum of an engine turning over, ready to drive me forward into a future of my own making. I kept quiet. After RevCore's Series A round closed, enough funding to hire a dedicated team and launch our first international pilot, I found solace in routine rather than revelry. Mornings began at first light, not with champagne breakfast or triumphant selfies, but with cold black coffee in the dim back office, surrounded by whiteboards scrawled with feature requests and bug reports. My reflection in the office window revealed a man who had shed every old insecurity, square jaw tightened by years of disciplined workouts, shoulders squared by the weight of responsibility, eyes bright with focus instead of doubt. I woke each day determined to build something enduring, not to settle scores. I traded revenge fantasies for work sprints. If I ever felt anger toward Ivy's family, toward the snide remarks and quiet exclusions, it dissipated the moment I powered up my laptop. Lines of code offered more satisfaction than imagined confrontations. A particularly nasty email from a prospective client who dismissively compared me to some grease monkey only fueled a 12-hour coding marathon to optimize RevCore's anomaly detection module. As error rates dropped and diagnostic speed improved by 20%, the bitterness in my gut gave way to genuine exhilaration. It was far more rewarding to earn respect through achievement than to engender it through retribution. My routine was ruthless but balanced. At dawn, I squeezed in a 40-minute CrossFit session, box jumps, kettlebell swings, rope climbs, each movement reminding me that strength was forged through incremental progress. After the workout, I showered, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that underscored my professional evolution, and drove to the loft where our small HQ was housed above an old auto shop. In the elevator, I greeted our receptionist, Simone, who always had fresh coffee waiting. On the 6th floor, the scent of espresso mingled with the faint hum of servers in the adjacent data room. Daily stand-ups lasted no more than 15 minutes. Elijah, my lead developer, outlined yesterday's milestones. Sophia, our UX designer, demonstrated revamped dashboards. Marcus, the head of marketing, shared beta user feedback. My questions were precise, my directives clear. Each team member respected the clarity and respect I showed them. Qualities a decade earlier would have been unimaginable. By midday, I slipped into the demo bay where we maintained a test rig, a half-disassembled sedan wired into RevCore sensors. I took a handheld interface, ran through diagnostics, and watched the system flag a misalignment in the crankshaft position sensor. A quick recalibration later, the alert vanished. I smiled at Elijah behind me. "Clean reading," I said. "Let's push this update to the staging server." By afternoon, investors' calls filled my calendar. I navigated questions about market expansion and integration partnerships with surgical equipment providers. Ironic, given that Ivy's family dominated that sector theoretically. I communicated leverage points, how RevCore's machine learning engine could be adapted to predict maintenance needs in medical imaging devices, reducing costly downtime. My tone was collaborative, forward-looking, never vindictive. When investors probed my motivation, I answered honestly. My drive isn't anger. It's curiosity. I want to see how far this technology can go. Lunch was no longer a bland affair of protein shakes at my desk. I met with potential collaborators, software architects from leading cloud providers, data scientists specializing in predictive analytics. Across shared plates of salads and grilled fish, we debated integration strategies, data privacy protocols, and scalability concerns. Evenings offered more the same. Peer review sessions where we vetted each other's code, ensuring RevCore's algorithms were robust against edge cases. The days blurred into a constant push toward excellence, as if every line of code and every strategic meeting were bricks in the foundation of a new legacy. Yet beneath the discipline and achievement, a quiet ember of tension smoldered. I was proud of my composure, but part of me longed for a moment of personal reckoning, a chance to see Ivy's family's reactions when they realized the scale of my success. That desire never deepened into malice. Instead, it took the form of a hypothetical scenario that entertained me during late-night debugging. Their stunned faces, forced apologies tangled on their lips, the awkwardness of encountering the man they once mocked. It was a fleeting daydream, one I never voiced but never entirely suppressed. Even as I coached my team to refine our product, my mind occasionally drifted to the ballroom where the world had once dismissed me. I buried that tension under productivity. Weekends saw me hosting hackathons in the loft, pizza boxes strewn across conference tables, teams racing to integrate new data visualization tools, laughs echoing off exposed brick walls. Those gatherings fostered a camaraderie I'd never felt with the Stantons, shared triumphs and collective problem-solving in place of condescension and exclusion. I reveled in the energy of bright minds collaborating, each success validating my belief that meritocracy, not nepotism, propelled innovation. Months of disciplined effort culminated in a product launch event. In a sleek downtown venue, I unveiled RevCore 2.0, an upgraded platform with real-time remote monitoring and predictive maintenance alerts that use deep learning architectures refined from thousands of test drives. Industry press filled the front rows, capturing my presentation. We believe machines should speak as clearly as humans. Our mission is to give technicians insight as intuitive as a conversation. The applause washed over me, but it was the Thunderbird Engineers magazine feature the next morning, declaring RevCore's technology, redefining automotive diagnostics that cemented my reputation. Through it all, I kept a low social profile. My LinkedIn announcements were straightforward: product highlights, partnership news, key hires. I avoided personal posts that hailed my triumphs as poetic justice, instead framing each milestone as progress for every technician and engineer who trusted our platform. The world recognized RevCore as my creation, but few knew the story behind the code, how every feature was born from years of rejection more than from pure technical curiosity. I preferred it that way. Spotlight should shine on solutions, not grudges. Then came the unexpected ping on Elijah's calendar. He looked up during stand-up, his brow furrowing at the meeting invitation. "Guys, looks like Glenbridge Hospital's hosting a wedding reception for Dr. Stanton's daughter tomorrow night," he said, clicking the date. Apparently, they sent out invites to a few local partners and vendors. He tapped at his screen and added, "Your name's not on it, obviously, but Malcolm Hale's innovation team is on the guest list because they license our platform." He paused, eyes flicking to me with a mix of curiosity and sympathy. "I'm going. Anyone else?" Silence rippled through the room. I stood still, heart skipping as memories flooded back. The satin bows, the lectern crowds, the whispered laughter at my expense. My pulse quickened, not with excitement, but with an undeniable sense of destiny. This wasn't a setback. It was an opportunity. I had no RSVP, no official invitation, but I had something far more potent, a story arc that begged for its final chapter. The man who wasn't allowed to attend Ivy and my own wedding reception would now choose how he made an entrance here. I inhaled slowly and met Elijah's gaze. "Count me in," I said, voice steady. The team exchanged glances but nodded in support. In that moment, I felt the familiar knot of anticipation, the same that once tightened each time Margaret Stanton's gaze found me. Only now, the knot was laced with confidence instead of doubt. The new me had no room for revenge, Yet it was clear that nothing felt more exhilarating than the prospect of returning to the stage where I was once a punchline. I didn't RSVP. I didn't need to. The moment I stepped through the rose-arched doorway of the Roseview Hotel's grand ballroom, I knew every polished tile and gilded molding would bear witness to the collision of my past and present. A chandelier the size of a small yacht spilled light across the vaulted ceiling, reflecting off crystal goblets and polished floors. Velvet drapes framed tall windows, and a quartet in the corner coaxed slow, legato notes from their instruments as glasses clinked and laughter rose in practiced crescendos. This was the very stage where, 9 years ago, I'd stood as a trembling groom, eager to marry Ivy Stanton, only to be cast as a joke by the people who swore they loved her. Tonight, the same hall had become a showcase for everything I'd built in their absence. I paused at the entrance, adjusting the cufflinks that bore RevCore's discreet logo, 2 interlocking gears I'd designed myself. My charcoal suit felt like armor, tailored to carve strength into broad shoulders and streamline my silhouette. Beneath the lapel, a crisp white pocket square hinted at precision rather than pretense. My heart pulsed, but my face remained still. I'd rehearsed this moment in countless permutations, storming in with fury, confronting Margaret Stanton head-on, delivering a speech that would reduce her academic hauteur to rubble. Yet as the quartet's soft melody washed over me, I realized that spectacle had never been my goal. My goal was simple: to occupy a space they once barred me from and to own it without apology. Guests turned as I made my way through tables adorned with ivory linens, rose-gold centerpieces, and place cards etched in cursive. White-coated surgeons from Glenbridge Hospital mingled with research fellows in cocktail dresses. Academic royalty circulated, while servers bore trays of smoked salmon canapes and decadent hors d'oeuvres. I recognized Fiona's husband, Dr. Malcolm Hale, chatting confidently about the latest neural imaging protocols. Nearby, Ivy's cousins giggled behind champagne flutes, scanning the crowd for the evening's entertainment. I could almost hear their thoughts. What's he doing here? Their uncertainty crackled like static in the air, an electric prelude to revelation. I drifted toward the back of the hall, unannounced and unaccounted for on any guest list. My steps were measured, each footfall a reminder that I no longer belonged to them. Yet a part of me craved to see the moment recognition flickered in their eyes, the moment they realized the grease-stained boy they once sneered at had become the innovator who now powered their tech. I stopped by a side table where the catering staff refilled champagne, my reflection shimmering in a mirrored panel behind them. I allowed myself a slow inhale, savoring the warmth of the room and the low hum of voices drifting over me like a tide. This was not the silent exclusion of my wedding day. Tonight, I was neither hidden nor dismissed. That's when Fiona spotted me. She was poised by the floral arch at center stage, in a gown of blush chiffon that caught the light with every subtle movement. Her smile froze as her gaze locked onto mine. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to fall silent, the quartet's violins trailing off mid-note. I saw in her eyes a mixture of shock and fear. Shock that I had dared to return uninvited, and fear that my presence might undo the perfect narrative she'd helped weave. Fiona's hand trembled slightly as she raised her flute, and pearls at her wrist rippled like raindrops. Around her, the assembled guests sensed the shift. They tilted their heads, caught between curiosity and recognition. Security. Fiona barked, voice sharp and brittle, as though she were shattering the illusion of civility. 2 discreetly uniformed attendants hovered at her side, scanning me with polite urgency. A collective murmur swelled, and all eyes turned to the grand entrance. For the first time that evening, I stepped forward into their view, shoulders square, back straight, the corners of my mouth tilting upward in a faint but confident smile. The room buzzed as whispers erupted. Isn't that Miles Carter? Malcolm Hale strode through the crowd, parting well-wishers with a protective urgency. He placed himself between me and Fiona's security detail, his expression a blend of indignation and admiration. How dare you? Fiona spat, but her words caught in her throat as Malcolm cleared his voice. May I remind you, Fiona, he said, calm and measured, that this is Miles Carter, the founder of RevCore Systems? His tone carried in the charged silence like a verdict. Gasps rippled through the assembly. The surgeons who had once regarded me as beneath their notice now exchanged startled glances. The researchers straightened their lapels, wrestling surprise into controlled expressions of polite interest. The quartet resumed their melody, but the notes trembled, caught between hesitation and resolve. I took a deliberate step forward, raising a hand in a gesture both courteous and unyielding. In that instant, time seemed to slow, each second stretching long enough to absorb every detail. The swell of Fiona's skirt, the tight line of Margaret Stanton's jaw, the way Malcolm's protective stance softened into pride. My voice cut through the hush, measured and crisp. Good evening. I apologize for the intrusion, but I felt compelled to join you tonight. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. This room once rejected me. This family once ridiculed me. But tonight, you celebrate innovation, and that innovation, it turns out, was born from my own hands. Murmurs rose again, this time laced with incredulity rather than contempt. I held their gaze, unwavering. I'm not here to make a scene, I continued. I came because I respect the work you do, and because I wanted to witness, firsthand, the celebration of progress built on the platform I created. Across the hall, Ivy's eyes found mine, her expression unreadable. Fiona's lips parted as though to speak, but nothing emerged. Silence returned, pregnant with possibility. A slow, steady applause began. Not the polite clapping of hosts obliging a cameo appearance, but the genuine, curious response of people realizing they had underestimated someone essential to their mission. Malcolm stepped aside, offering me space to move freely among the tables. The security detail relaxed, stepping back into anonymity. In that moment, I understood that the room had shifted. It had accepted me not because I demanded it, but because I embodied the values it cherished: innovation, perseverance, and the courage to return, unbroken. I nodded to Ivy, who stood at the far end of the dance floor, framed by a cascade of white roses and twinkling lights. Her mouth quivered, as though she were searching for the right words. But I didn't wait for her. Instead, I took a glass of champagne from a passing server, lifted it in a silent toast to the room, and allowed myself the briefest smile of satisfaction. The man they once barred from the party was now an honored guest simply by virtue of his achievements. And as the quartet struck a triumphant chord, I realized that the chapter of rejection had finally closed, and the next chapter, whatever it held, would be written on my own terms. I stood at the threshold of the reception hall, my chest tightening as I watched the swirl of gowns and tuxedos, the clink of glasses, the laughter rising like a tide. The floral arch that had once framed Fiona's entrance now framed mine, but the air around me crackled with a different energy. Gone were the looks of polite curiosity. In their places flickered confusion, shock, and, finally, recognition. When Fiona's mother, Dr. Margaret Stanton, spotted me, she froze mid-toast, her hand trembling as she raised her champagne flute. The pearls at her wrist caught the light, shimmering like startled moths. Her voice wavered as she hissed, "Why is this defect here?" A cruel echo of the words she had used to dismiss me 9 years ago. Time rippled backward in that moment, and I felt the weight of every insult settle like a stone in my gut. I met her gaze without flinching. In that instant, the cold contempt that had once defined our relationship transformed into something more dangerous: vulnerability. Margaret's lips parted, but no apology came. Instead, her eyes widened as she registered the subtle details of my appearance: a custom-tailored suit that hugged my shoulders, a crisp white shirt that spoke of quiet confidence, the discreet lapel pin of RevCore's logo glinting in the chandelier's glow. The world she had built on pedigree and prestige now trembled at the presence of the man she had tried to erase. Fiona barked for security, her voice brittle as a cracking twig. 2 attendants in black suits advanced toward me, their expressions polite but determined. I raised a single hand in a gesture of calm. "Please," I said, voice steady, "there's no need." The chatter died, music faltered, and every eye turned to the center of the ballroom. Servers paused mid-step, crystal glasses poised like champagne-filled prisms. In that pregnant silence, I let the moment stretch, savoring the shift in power that had taken years of silent ambition to achieve. Before security could reach me, Dr. Malcolm Hale, Fiona's new husband, stepped forward. His ambition was legendary at Glenbridge Hospital. He had championed the acquisition of RevCore's diagnostics platform just months ago. He placed a firm hand on Fiona's arm, his eyes locking onto mine. "Do you have any idea who this man is?" he asked, voice low but resonant enough to carry through the hushed crowd. His question was rhetorical. Gasps echoed like whispers of wind through a deserted hallway as recognition dawned on the assembled guests. I inclined my head in acknowledgement. "Dr. Hale is correct," I said. "I am Miles Carter, founder of RevCore Systems." My words landed like stones tossed into still water, rippling through the room. The surgeons in white coats exchanged startled glances. The researchers in cocktail dresses stared at me as though I had sprouted wings. As the founder of the very technology that powered Glenbridge's state-of-the-art diagnostic units, I was neither interloper nor defect. I was the architect of their medical revolution. Phones emerged like synchronized fireflies, cameras flashing, screens flickering with newfound headlines. RevCore Systems founder spotted at Stanton celebration. Mechanic turned tech visionary emerges in unlikely venue. The buzz swelled until servers resumed their steps, weaving between guests as though nothing had happened, though everything had changed. Margaret's face drained of color. Her tailored gown drooped at the shoulders, the emerald hue now as hollow as the greeting she had once refused me. Fiona's blush of triumph vanished, replaced by a shock-fueled glare. I took a measured step forward. The wooden dance floor creaked beneath my polished shoes, and I felt the full force of history pressing in. Memories surfaced of the night Ivy had handed me my divorce papers. The sting of that moment had fueled every sunrise that followed. Every hour I spent refining algorithms, assembling a team, forging global partnerships. The feeling was no longer bitterness, but an austere satisfaction, like watching a meticulously constructed puzzle finally snap into place. I lifted my glass of champagne, crystal clear, effervescent promise, and let my gaze sweep across the crowd. You have no idea, do you? I repeated Margaret's words from years ago, but this time they landed as a mirror to their own ignorance. The room fell silent again, heavier this time, every heartbeat audible in the hush. You dismissed me as unworthy. You called me a defect, unfit for Ivy Stanton. But it turns out, the defect was in your judgment, not in me. A murmur of awe, disbelief, and reluctant admiration rippled through the guests. Xavier, the hospital's chief of cardiology, raised an eyebrow and nodded toward me, as if acknowledging a long-overdue truth. His gesture was small, but it carried the weight of institutional acceptance. Others followed suit. Applause flickered first like hesitant candles, then swelled into a genuine ovation, not for a scene stealer, but for the quiet authority I now commanded. Margaret took a step forward, her voice trembling as she tried to reclaim some semblance of dignity. Miles, dear, she faltered, unable to thread apology and justification into a coherent sentence. Fiona's mouth hung open as though stung by a nettle. Even Ivy, standing at the edge of the dance floor in her pale gown, wavered between regret and relief. I didn't give them a chance to recover. I'm not here for apologies, I said, voice calm but resolute. I'm here to celebrate progress, innovation, and the power of perseverance. RevCore's platform runs diagnostics across 4 continents, predicts engine failures before they occur, and saves businesses millions in maintenance costs. It was born from a desire to solve problems, not to settle scores. Tonight, you toast a new union, but know that the foundation you celebrate was laid by someone you once deemed unworthy. I paused, letting my words settle like sediment in clear water. Then I lowered my glass in a silent salute and turned to leave. Whispers followed me. Who is he? Can you believe it? I never saw it coming. Yet none dared stop me. I walked through the floral arch, out of the grand ballroom, and into the soft glow of the hotel corridor. My heartbeat steadied, adrenaline receded, and a serene pride filled me. The man who once felt like an anomaly in their world had reclaimed his narrative. Outside, Elijah and our team waited in the car, their faces alight with triumphant smiles. I slipped behind the wheel, the hum of the engine a familiar comfort after the storm of revelation. As I closed my eyes for a moment, I felt no urge for revenge, only the exhilarating rush of vindication without malice. The wedding guests would remember this night not for its flowers or speeches, but for the ghost who returned and the truth he embodied. I started the car and pulled away, leaving the Roseview Hotel's lights fading in my rearview mirror. Their world would continue, but there was no place for defects there anymore, only possibilities yet to be realized. And as the city lights twinkled ahead, I knew my journey had only just begun. I stood in the quiet glow of the hotel corridor, heart still thrumming from the crescendo of revelation behind me. The hush of the carpeted hallway felt surreal after the uproar in the ballroom. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let the memory wash over me. Margaret Stanton's jaw unclenching, Fiona's mouth frozen mid-complaint, Dr. Malcolm Hale's protective posture shifting into reluctant pride. Those seconds had felt like a lifetime, the tension of 9 years dissolving in the space of a single declaration. I was Miles Carter, founder of RevCore Systems. Not the grease-stained mechanic they dismissed, but the architect of the very technology that now powered their world. I exhaled, steadying myself against the cool marble wall, fingertips grazing its polished surface. A soft click announced the approach of a maid pushing a service cart laden with fresh towels. She glanced at me, eyebrow raised, and whispered good evening with the practiced discretion of hotel staff accustomed to guests at every rung of success. I nodded in return, savoring the irony. At that moment, I felt more guest than intruder, more insider than outsider. Behind the heavy double doors, the faint echo of the quartet strings drifted through. I could still hear the murmur of conversations, the clink of crystal as the ballroom returned to its celebration. But the narrative had shifted. In that hallowed space, I had reclaimed my story. No longer would I be the punchline to Ivy Stanton's family jokes. I was the founder they needed yet could never have imagined. A gentle buzz on my phone brought me back to the present. It was Elijah, all clear. Car's ready when you are. I slipped the phone into my pocket and took a measured breath. The car ride ahead would offer comfort, the hum of the engine, the camaraderie of my team, the shared exhilaration of a secret well-kept until the perfect moment. I straightened my tie and smoothed the lapel of my jacket, ensuring every crease was impeccable. Even now, after all I'd achieved, I recognized how presentation could command respect before words were spoken. I crossed the threshold back into the ballroom's vestibule, where two attendants gave me a nod of recognition rather than suspicion. One offered a discreet smile. Perhaps he had caught wind of the commotion, or maybe he saw the RevCorps pin on my lapel and realized that the man once barred from the party carried more authority than any surgeon in a white coat. I gave him a curt nod, stepping past stacks of invitation cards and discarded programs until I reached the valet stand. Elijah leaned against the polished chrome of the waiting sedan, arms folded, eyes bright with pride. Behind him, our three core developers, Sophia, Marcus, and Lena, shared quiet congratulations. They'd watched from afar as the evening unfolded, reluctant to step into the spotlight, yet willing to support me unreservedly. I allowed myself a private smile. Their loyalty and talent fueled every line of code that bore my name. Ready? Elijah's voice cut through my reverie. Always, I replied, handing over my jacket before sliding into the back seat. The leather embraced me like a familiar ally. I buckled in and turned forward, catching a glimpse of my reflection in the rearview mirror. The same man who started with oil-stained hands and a burning desire to prove himself, now sitting unchallenged, triumphant. As Elijah eased the car onto the slick streets, the hotel's lights receded behind us. The night air smelled of rain-soaked pavement and city promise. I leaned back, letting the moment unfold in silence. No calls from Ivy, no messages from the Stanton clan. Only the hum of tires on asphalt and the steady beat of my own confidence. I thought of Ivy, her expression when I first declared my identity. Regret and surprise warred on her face, and I wondered how long it would take for her to reconcile the man she once abandoned with the success he now embodied. But that was her path to navigate, not mine. My focus lay ahead. On the next iteration of RevCorps, on new partnerships in healthcare that could adapt our diagnostics to hospital equipment, on mentorship for aspiring technologists who lacked pedigrees but possessed relentless drive. Our first stop was the office, a converted loft buzzing with overnight code deployments and international client calls. There, in the glow of monitors and beneath the hum of server racks, I would return to the work that truly defined me. Success was not a one-time revelation but an ongoing journey of innovation. I would refine our algorithms, expand our sensor networks, and build a legacy that transcended any family feud or social snub. As the city lights blurred past the tinted windows, I allowed myself one final reflection, the power of walking away clean. In that ballroom, I had spoken my truth and disrupted their narrative. I had no need for vindictive speeches or public shaming. My presence, calm and unforced, spoke volumes. I had shown them that resilience and creativity outlast prejudice and pedigree. That was the real triumph. The car slid to a stop outside our office parking bay. Elijah killed the engine and turned to me, eyes alight. "Tomorrow, we start integration with Ridgeway Medical," he said. "They're impressed with the demo." I nodded, anticipation stirring in my chest. New challenges beckoned, and I welcomed them like old friends. I stepped out into the cool night, the sky above a tapestry of stars obscured by city glow. The world had shifted beneath my feet, boundaries redrawn by years of perseverance. I had reclaimed my worth not through confrontation, but through unyielding dedication to my craft. Today I was no longer defined by what I lacked, but by what I had built: a platform, a team, and a vision. And as I crossed the threshold into our office, I embraced the next chapter, one written not in spite of my past, but because of it. I watched Margaret Stanton rise from her seat, lips trembling as she searched for words that might bridge the chasm she'd created. The ballroom's grand windows framed her silhouette against the moonlit courtyard beyond, an unintentional metaphor for her distance from me. "Miles, dear," she began, voice wavering. "We misunderstood. You always had potential." She trailed off, as though potential were a consolation prize rather than the foundation of every advancement their hospitals now enjoyed. Julian Stanton cleared his throat beside her, smoothing the lapels of his designer jacket. "We were hard on you," he offered. "It was out of concern. You understand, don't you?" His words hovered in the air like a poorly formed diagnosis, clinical but devoid of empathy. I held their gazes steadily, noting the tremor in Margaret's perfume-scented breath and the polite rigidity of Julian's posture. It would have been easy to unleash every barb I'd silently collected over the years. I could have cataloged each backhanded compliment, each cold dinner, each whispered, "I told you so." But by then, the apex of my vindication had already passed. The music was rising again in the ballroom, and champagne glasses were clinking not in mockery, but in genuine celebration of my achievements, of their reliance on my work, of the irony that I had become indispensable to the world they once excluded me from. "My mother and father," I said, voice measured. "Your words mean well now, but they would have meant more 9 years ago." I paused to let that sink in. She and Julian exchanged a glance that spoke of regret and defensiveness in equal measure. "But this isn't about apologies," I continued, stepping forward into the circle of chandeliers' glow. "I didn't come back to collect confessions or to demand recognition." I turned and surveyed the crowd: surgeons in white coats, researchers with guarded curiosity, colleagues from Glenbridge who now regarded me with respectful nods. "I came back to remind myself of something critical," I said. "Rejection isn't the end. It's the beginning of reinvention." A ripple of murmured assent rose among the guests as they absorbed the truth of those words. No longer was I the romantic figure or the scorned ex. I was a living testament to transformation. Fiona hovered at the edge of the gathering, her blush fading into an ash-gray remorse. Ivy stood nearby, expression unreadable, eyes glistening with emotion. I locked eyes with her for a moment, searching for the girl who once believed in me enough to stand beside me, and I felt compassion more than anger. But I said nothing. Compassion was not a concession. It was a confirmation of my own growth. "I'm grateful for tonight," I concluded, raising my glass not to them, but to vision and perseverance. "Because without your doubt, I would not have built RevCore Systems. Without your scorn, I would not have found my voice. And without your apathy, I would never have realized my worth." A gentle applause began, deliberate and sincere, as the guests acknowledged that their world had shifted. Margaret's lips quivered, but no apology formed. Instead, she offered a fragile nod of respect. Julian dipped his head once, stiffly, as though newly initiated into a fraternity of one. Fiona's husband, Dr. Hale, clapped me on the shoulder, admiration replacing earlier irritation. Ivy moved closer, her hand hovering near mine, but I slipped away, choosing not to reopen wounds under the glow of chandeliers. Outside, the night air was cool and clear as I joined Elijah and our team by the valet stand. They waited with patient smiles, proud eyes shining with shared triumph. I slipped into the back seat of our car, the leather cushion welcoming me like the embrace of a stranger who knew my worth. The engine's purr was a comforting cadence, reminding me that progress moved ever forward. As we pulled away, the hotel lights dwindling behind us, I felt no bitterness, only a quiet joy. I understood now that the most powerful vindication requires no apologies, only proof of one's own evolution. And in that understanding, I found freedom. I eased into the back seat of the car, the night's tension dissolving into the soft hum of idle engines. Outside, the Roseview Hotel's lights receded like distant stars, and I let the moment settle, an exhilarating weightlessness after 9 years of strained expectations and silent endurance. My team sat beside me, eyes bright with triumph and relief. No one spoke. Words would have felt unnecessary. In our shared silence, there was the unspoken understanding that tonight marked not just a personal victory but a milestone in all our lives. Elijah glanced at me, a grin tugging at his lips. "Well," he said finally, "that was something." I offered a wry smile in return, tightening my jacket against the night's cool air. "Something indeed," I replied. The leather under my fingertips felt real, tangible evidence of the journey I'd undertaken, from grease-stained garages to global boardrooms. My phone buzzed briefly, a notification from the office. RevCore's servers showed a surge in demo requests since our surprise appearance. The irony wasn't lost on me. Their astonishment had become the best marketing campaign I could have imagined. As the car rolled through the empty streets, I reflected on Ivy's late email, a tentative apology, a soft recognition of the man I'd become. I didn't open it until we reached the office. When I finally tapped it, her words blurred past the screen: regret, admiration, a hope for closure. I deleted the message without drafting a reply. Not out of spite, but because I no longer needed her validation. My worth had been proven in algorithms and client testimonials, in the trust of my team, and the respect of an industry that once dismissed me. Pulling into the parking bay, I switched off the engine. The glow of monitors seeped through the loft's windows, promising new challenges, feature updates, integration tests, global rollouts. I stepped out into the crisp air and inhaled deeply, savoring the scent of possibility. Behind me, the hotel's memory faded. Ahead, an expanse of ambition unfolded. I thought of the engine's smooth purr after a successful tune-up, of lines of code compiling without error, of the first time a client called to say RevCore had saved them thousands in downtime. Tonight, I had reminded the Stantons that rejection can fuel reinvention. Tomorrow, I would remind the world that true power lies not in pedigree but in perseverance. I walked toward the loft entrance with purposeful strides, each step a testament to the man I'd become, unbound, unbothered, and utterly unstoppable.